Hi everybody, today we're going to talk about place of articulation. And by place of articulation, what we mean is where we make constrictions in the vocal tract when we produce consonant sounds. Let's start out with a kind of roadmap. And by roadmap, I mean the picture that you see on the right side of the screen. The picture that you're looking at is called a mid-sagittal section. It's a cross-sectional view of your head with labels that are placed there to show you where we make constrictions for consonant sounds. I think a picture like this makes it a little bit easier to see what I mean by a cross-sectional picture of the head that's labeled to show you the parts of the vocal tract that we'll be talking about here. Okay then, with this in mind, there are basically two goals that I've set out for us in this video. The first is to become familiar with and be able to label the mid-sagittal section that I've shown you on this video. And the second is to understand how the labels relate to the constrictions we make in the vocal tract when we produce consonant sounds. So now let's start thinking about how we can relate consonant sounds to our sagittal section view. Let's remember that consonants are about making constrictions in the vocal tract. So for example, if you have a constriction that's made with both lips, what you've made is something we call a bilabial sound. P and B are bilabial. Now let's look at a mid-sagittal view of a labiodental sound. Here we see that the constriction is made with the upper teeth and the lower lip. F and V are thus what we call labiodental sounds. Here's one more kind of sound that's also visible to us when people produce it. If we take a look at the picture, what we see is that this one also involves the teeth, but it's different from the bilabial and labiodental sounds we've looked at. And this is because, for the first time, we're actually involving the tongue in the constriction that we make when we make a sound. So sounds made that involve a constriction between the teeth and the tongue are called dental sounds, or in this case, as in the picture here, interdental sounds, where we see that the tongue is between the upper and lower teeth. Words like theme and these begin with interdental sounds. We use an eth symbol for words that begin with the sound in these, and we use a theta for the interdental sound that begins words like theme. Okay, now it's going to get a little more complicated because we're going to look at places of articulation for consonants that aren't actually visible. That is, we can't see them when people are speaking. And the next stop on our tour is going to be a place we're going to call the alveolar ridge. Here's a close-up sagittal section view. As we can see labeled in the picture, the alveolar ridge is directly behind the upper teeth. We produce alveolar sounds by bringing the tip or blade of our tongue into contact with the alveolar ridge. It's worth noting that in a sense, the alveolar ridge is a really popular hangout for sounds. Many sounds, many consonant sounds in English are alveolar sounds. Two very simple examples are the sounds T as in to and D as in do. The next stop on our place of articulation tour is the palatoalveolar stop. The palatoalveolar area is just behind the alveolar ridge, but in front of the hard palate. This is illustrated in the sagittal section by the arrows. The following picture is a mid-sagittal section that shows us the constriction we make when we make a palatoalveolar sound. Notice that the tongue blade is making contact with the palatoalveolar area right behind the alveolar ridge. So here's your tongue blade, and here's your palatoalveolar area. The first sound in my name is a palatoalveolar consonant. When we transcribe the first sound in my name, we use the following symbol to represent ch. Okay, so the next stop on our journey of the mouth is what we call the hard palate. The hard palate's actually quite easy to find with the tip of your own tongue. If you curl your tongue tip upwards and you press it against the top of your mouth, you should feel on the roof of your mouth kind of a hard, bony dome. That's the hard palate. Consonants that are made with a constriction between the tongue body and this hard palate area are what we call, not surprisingly, palatal sounds. So here's a picture of a palatal sound. There's your hard palate. There's the body of the tongue. And the first sound in the word yes, for example, is a palatal sound. In linguistics, we use the symbol J to represent the palatal sound that begins words like yes and year and even university. If we go back even further into the mouth, behind the hard palate, we come to what's called the soft palate, which is also known as the velum. Consonants that are made by forming a constriction between the back of the tongue, or what we call the tongue dorsum, and the velum are what we call velar sounds. So here's the velum, and here's the tongue dorsum, which is raised to form a constriction with the velum. The first sounds in words like go and cool are what we call velar sounds. We use the phonetic symbol G to represent the first sound in go, and we use the phonetic symbol K to represent the first sound in words like cool. So interestingly, English has one more place of articulation for consonant sounds. But what's curious about this particular place of articulation is that it doesn't involve the teeth, the lips, or the tongue. So, do you have any guesses about what that place of articulation might be? Well, let's think for a minute about a word like happy. The H sound that we hear in happy or a ha or a head isn't just silence. It's actually the result of air rushing up from your lungs, passing through the space between your vocal cords, and flowing out of your mouth. The space between your vocal cords is called the glottis. And here's a picture of what it looks like in real life. We use the symbol H to represent the glottal sound in words like happy. But it's worth noting that glottal sounds are different from other consonants in that they don't involve what we can call a supralaryngeal place of articulation. That is to say, they don't involve a constriction above the vocal cords. The energy that's generated, or the stopping of air that's generated in glottal sounds, is generated right there at the glottis. Here's what we've done. I've taken English as an example in order to walk you through examples that illustrate the concept of place of articulation. We've looked at these places of articulation in English: bilabial sounds, labiodental sounds, interdental sounds, alveolar sounds, palatoalveolar sounds, palatal sounds, velar sounds, and glottal sounds. But there's one thing I haven't done. And the one thing I haven't done is that I haven't tried to list every single English consonant there is at each of the places of articulation that I've introduced to you. Having said that, now that you've got the idea, take a look, for example, at this chart of the English consonants. Each of the columns shows you the number of consonants that the English language has at each of those places of articulation that are illustrated in the chart. Note also that the chart uses the terms linguodental and postalveolar to describe what I've been calling interdental and palatoalveolar. Don't freak out about this. It's no big deal. And just so you know that I'm serious when I say that it's no big deal, here's an amusing penguin. Okay, this pretty much wraps it up for this video. what I want to tell you is that our next video, we're going to look at what we call manner of articulation. So stay tuned.